What we're going to do now is we're going to welcome you to our conversation about finding great staff. And to get us started, I'll tell you a little bit about what we're going to cover. We are today, while we're talking together, we're going to talk about getting really clear about what the purpose of having staff is, being really clear about what kind of goals you're working on, what impact you want them to have, and then thinking about the individual person that you're going to need to be able to do that really well. We're going to talk a little bit about recruiting and how to do that and where to do that. But a big piece of hiring staff is knowing that you can afford them. And then it's about some of those employment decisions that people get really stuck on. And so while we can't give you HR advice today, that's not our expertise. We can tell you some of the key questions that people come with and some of the stuff that's helpful to know at the beginning. So through this, we've made the assumption that you have got your disability support funding and that you are hiring the staff members. But that is entirely, that's complicated. You might not be at that place. So we have run some other workshops on individualized funding, and we've got one in 2 weeks' time on the needs assessment process. So really open to going back and watching that other video or the one in a fortnight's time if you want to know a little bit more about how to get the money to pay your staff. So today we're assuming that you already know. Okay, so now we're going to hand over to Sarah, and she's going to give us a little context of this.
Cool. Thanks, Ainsley. So just a little story to start with of a family that we've worked with, just to give you an idea of how it works. This is just one example. It's not, I wouldn't say it's typical, but it's an example of a family that we've worked with. So for the sake of the conversation, I'm going to call his name's Lee, a young gamer, 20 years old, with autism. Mom was keen for Lee to learn some independent skills and do other activities besides computer games. She wanted someone who could talk computer games whilst encouraging Lee to do things like his laundry or tidying up. He had very specific games that he played, and it's essential we found someone who has knowledge of these games, because this will be where the support person can build a relationship with Lee. He was at the age where everything Mum says is just not going to listen to. So it needed to be someone perhaps of a similar age, similar interests, that he could build a relationship with and could encourage him to take care of himself. So we created a job ad with collaboration with the family. We create a job ad which has the specific requirements as well as details of location and hours. And then we start advertising. So we advertise in our usual places, which is social media, student job boards. But we actually, with this time, we weren't really getting anywhere with our usual places. So we reviewed the job ad and the strategy, and we decided to target some gaming Facebook pages. And through that, we very quickly did find a great candidate who then became employed in the role. And from what I understand, it's going really well. You might just be thinking, wait a minute, Facebook, that could be a bit dodgy. How do you know that they're genuinely interested in the role? Can Facebook be reliable to find good candidates? Well, the answer is yes. By having, we have a phone chat. We get a good sense of who we're talking to. We ask them about their motivations for the role, and why do they think they would be suitable? What experience have they had in the past? And we kind of weave that all into a casual conversation to really bring out their personality and find out what sits with them with the job. So it's by no means perfect, but we can tell a lot from the conversation, and by asking specific questions. We encourage the family to follow up with reference checks and police checks. And a bonus to this story is that only did we find a good match, but the person that we employed also had a disability. So that was a really great outcome. That's it. Thanks, Ainsley.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarah. Okay, so now what we need to do, trying to make my video look pretty, but that doesn't always work. Okay, so what we're going to do is we are going to keep moving through our conversation. So, as I said, the first thing we need to get clear on is, why do you need a staff member? So it's about being really clear about what the goals are you're trying to achieve, and thinking about the short term and the long term. So in that situation, the story Sarah just told is that the family knew that by finding someone who could meet a short-term need, which was about just actually building a relationship on the stuff that this young man was really passionate about, was the only way to get any impact towards the long-term needs. So what they knew was that we needed to the short-term goal had to be someone who could build a really strong relationship. And the hope is that that was going to progress towards helping him build his independence. That was going to help him to expand his world out of just games into being out in the community and hopefully joining the wider community. So it's about making sure that you think about the impact that you are trying to have, because what's really common is that our buckets are all pretty empty. We don't have a lot of capacity, we don't have a lot of time, and so we just find the first decent person who comes along and we just think about what we need today. And I get that if that's where you're at, then actually probably what you need is to meet those short-term needs. Um, But if you do know that you're trying to work on that behavior support strategy, if you're trying to work on building relationships in particular parts of the community, then having that stuff in your mind is really helpful when you think about what your right person's going to be. Um, and I like to ask, what if we found you the person of your dreams, what would be happening? Like if we found you that like absolutely magic person, what would that look like? What impact would that have? And while we often have to compromise, you know, the workforce can be really, really variable. It is helpful to know what a great outcome would look like, so that you can embed that within your thinking. So when you think about the actual person that you're looking for, I like to kind of break it into these three bits. So you've got the head, what are the skills and the knowledge and the experience that they have to have had? Do they need to be a mentor or a teacher? Do they need to be a peer? What knowledge do they have to have acquired to be able to be really successful? And sometimes that's disability related stuff, and sometimes that's interest related stuff. Sometimes it's knowing about kids. It's all sorts of different things, but it's you knowing what is the non-negotiables, what's going to make you feel really comfortable with this person in your home. Um, then it's thinking about the heart. And when I say someone who you feel comfortable with having in your home, for me, that is a really big piece of it, is that if you are not comfortable with this person, if this person does not align to the values of your household, they can be as fancy as they want. They can have all the experience and the qualifications in the world. But if you don't resonate with them, they're not worth it. So that's about personality, that's about how they go about building relationships, but that is also about core values. And so we do often ask people about religion, we do ask people about culture. Because while when you go to advertise stuff, you can't specifically say, I want someone who is blah, a particular ethnicity, a particular religion, um, because from anti-discrimination laws, you're not allowed to say that you only want people who are this. But it is really valid to go out and say, I need someone who aligns to my culture and my values. So they need to, you're allowed to ask for someone who's at least an ally to that, who has an understanding of that, so that yeah, you're getting someone who you're comfortable with in your home. So then it's about thinking about the hands, the practicality of it. So, where do you find people whose availability matches with the hours that you have? You don't want someone who's looking for a full-time job if you've only got 5 hours a week. And there is a huge quantity of people who will apply for a 5 hour a week job in the hope that it magically becomes a full-time job. So thinking about how you talk about the hours of the role, thinking about if the job, like how local they need to be. If it's a 1 hour shift, you need someone really local. So how do you keep your net into a local community? But if you're offering 12-hour shifts, then local is less relevant. Um, Thinking about driver's licenses, and particularly if you're looking for a mentor for a younger person, um, finding someone with a full license under the age of 25 is quite rare these days. So just, I guess, weighing up how much you need that. Is it about kind of, I guess, make things this much easier, or is it actually a fundamental part of the role? If they've got to pick somebody up and drive them across town to go to some class or activity, then clearly the driver's license is not negotiable. But if it's just in case that sometime you might possibly need to, then I guess just questioning that. And then there's also the physicality of the job. So thinking about if there's lifting involved in the role, what kind of things are needed to maintain safety on both parts. So safety for the disabled person and safety for the staff member, because if you're the employer, you've got an obligation to maintain their health and safety. So you can't have people doing heavy lifting, or if there's the risk of aggression and that sort of thing, then we need to make sure that you're finding someone who's got the skills and the support to not get in a dangerous situation. So I like to write a list. When Sarah and I talk to people about recruitment, we write a list. We go through not quite these questions, but in essence these questions, and we write down all of these elements. So then you've got to think about it from the perspective of the person that you're wanting to employ. So what I tend to find, because we do a lot of recruitment for youth and for children, where we talk to the parent, and the parent says, "Oh, they like gaming," and we have learned that gaming is not something that resonates with gamers. It's not that they don't think that they're gamers; it's that they want to know more. That's not specific enough. Saying I like movies doesn't tell you anything. Who doesn't like movies? But I like horror movies, or I like comedies, or I like Pixar movies. Really different kinds of movies. So being able to think about what that person is going to be looking for in a job. So what words would they use to describe themselves? What words would they use to describe the job? So we don't tend to talk about support workers. We don't even tend to talk about caregivers unless it is a real caregiving job. Most of the time we talk about what's going to be fun in the job, what you're going to actually do. So making sure that we're using the words that are going to make that person stop and look. Why would that person, the person of your dreams, stop and read your ad? So here's just a couple of examples, and I know the writing is teeny tiny small, so you don't need to read them. And we will send you these slides, so you're welcome to read them in more depth and take some inspiration. But for the specific example, it was quite a practical job. So it was helping cleaning, helping with a little bit of cooking and a little bit of personal care, helping them to wash their hair. But what was fundamentally important to this person was that they respected this person's pronouns and their membership of the rainbow community. So we talked to them, what words would you describe, so that we're really clear on how we talk about you. But then it was just kind of helping to mix in that core value that you had to have. You had to be a member of that community or a really genuine ally to that community for this person to be comfortable having you in their home, having you touch them when you help them wash their hair, but also having the skills to be able to cook. So it's just a good example. And so we write a little ad, but you can see the job doesn't say, would you like to be a disability support worker? Because actually knowing anything about disability was the least relevant part of the job. And then we made a pretty picture to go with it because we used it on social media a lot. And then this similar, different. This is a young lady who was looking for a coordinator to help her manage her staff and run her payroll and that sort of thing. And so her role was a lot about making sure that she was central to all decision making, that she'd had an experience before of someone who had disempowered her quite a bit. And so this was about putting her capability front and center in the ad and talking about her as a university student and talking about her, kind of her engagement in decision making. And then mixed in with all of that is the practical things you need to know about. So 2 different ads, 2 different styles, but really valuable if you're looking for a little inspiration. There are also some really cool ones that have gone viral every once in a while, where people have kind of posted some really charismatic sounding job ads. I mean, we had a person we were supporting not so long ago who was saying that for their job ad, they wanted to word it as evil genius scientist seeks minion, something like that. And I went, oh, I wouldn't apply for that job. But you know what? The person who got the job, they loved the title. They thought it was just perfect. And so it's making sure that you are using the words that the person you're looking for is going to feel comfortable with. And there isn't a right and a wrong, so long as you're not being really rude or discriminatory, you're fine to talk about it really genuinely. Um, so going back to that discrimination for a tiny second, there is a special dispensation when you're talking about not being discriminatory in job ads. If the job has to be gender matched for a particular reason, you are allowed to ask for a specific gender. You do tend to get a little bit of flack about it, but you are allowed to ask, say that because this role involves, kind of personal care for a young lady, we need a female for the role. And if you Google it, there's a specific piece of legislation that permits you to do that. So you're really welcome to, that's the one exception. You can't say you have to be Christian to be in my household, but you can say you have to be a female to be able to help this young woman in the shower. So having done all that, you've now got a sense of who you're looking for. Writing a job ad, they all look really different. But then you've got to work out where to advertise. So as Sarah said before, we do a lot of advertising on Student Job Search. Student Job Search is free. It's really easy to register, and they actually have quite helpful people who call you and follow up and give you a bit of advice. So particularly if you're not sure if you've worded things right, they'll call you back and talk to you about it if they're not sure quite what you're looking for. So that's a really valuable way if you're looking for students. Not everybody is. We find Facebook a good way to find local groups. So there's a suburb group for every suburb in Auckland. Sometimes there's like 3 in some suburbs. But if you're looking for someone local, if you've got 1-hour shifts and things like that, then being able to go to your local community online, neighbourly, Facebook, but also physical job notice boards, which is one of the things that we don't really do because we do everything remotely. But there's those notice boards at the supermarket, in the library, at the community centre, often at the Citizens Advice Bureau. Being able to put flyers up places like that can be really helpful, depending again on what you're looking for. So then there are also all the formal job ad platforms, so things like Seek and Trade Me. If you're going to advertise there, you need to have a think about how you make your job stand out. So it costs $350 to advertise on one of those platforms these days. And what I find is that you do get lots of applicants. You can quite easily get 60 applicants for a job. Most of them are not yet in New Zealand, and most of them need visa sponsorship, even if you've ticked the box that says they have to be here and you can't sponsor a visa. But also they last time I looked, there were 1,200 support worker jobs on Seek. So just thinking about what you put as that title, what you put as the little bit that they can read before they tick your job, because you're competing with those really big corporate companies. So why is someone going to want your job instead of one of those really big corporate jobs? And personally, I completely see why they would. But you want to entice the right people to bother clicking on your job so you don't have to sort through 60 people, none of whom are relevant. Okay. Lots of me talking, I apologize. So then we start working through our budget. So we're going to assume an individualized funding budget, but it could also be any other kind of funding that you have to pay for this person in your employment. Most of the individualized funding hosts do have some kind of calculator, but they don't all. And I guess it's just you stopping to work it out. So what happens in general in individualized funding is that if you've got household management or personal care, that gets allocated at $37 an hour. So that's based on an assumption that you are paying your staff um, the maximum of the pay equity rates, which goes up to 28.25 at the moment, and that you're paying a payroll fee and that you have leave and that kind of on costs, a little bit of mileage. If you pay your staff member $25, then you're saving money every single hour. If you pay your staff members $32 an hour, then you still need to think that stuff through. I'm really big on you should pay what those people are worth to you. If this person is this level of great, and if they weren't working for you, they would be working at McDonald's, then you pay them that. You pay them what they'd get if they worked in that corresponding role. If that person comes to you to do some kind of tutoring, mentoring stuff, tutors are often getting paid 30 something dollars an hour. So you just need to factor that into the decisions you're making. Same with professional nannies. Professional nannies make more than support workers. So you just need to kind of consider what other job that person would be equipped for, so that you pay the money that they're worth. If you're looking for someone amazing with these phenomenal mentoring skills and all of this experience, they're not going to come for $25. So it's just thinking that stuff through. So there's those just direct hourly rate kind of costs. Find out what your host does with leave allocations. So weirdly, the IF hosts are not consistent in what they do with leave. So if you have a staff member on a permanent part-time contract, you need to know what's happened to that leave, whether it's coming out of your budget on a regular basis or whether it's someday that staff member is going to go on holiday for 3 weeks or quit, and you're going to have a big expenditure spike. So just asking your IF host, how does leave get calculated and accrued for, is a really important thing for you to know. Because otherwise, if they go on leave for 3 weeks and you replace them, and then suddenly for that 3 weeks you're spending twice your budget, it can be a big surprise. So yeah, it's just for me, it's just asking that stuff so that you know. Yeah, factoring in mileage costs and all of that kind of stuff. And I say to do this math because I want you to get the maximum out of your budget. I don't want you to get to, a month before your budget expires and you discover that you've got 20% of it unspent because you'd assumed you could only have those 6 hours of personal care. And actually, because you're systemically underspent for the year, you've got an extra 30 hours you could have spent and you haven't. So do watch it and do see how you can get the most out of that budget. So then you found an amazing person. That happened quite fast, didn't it? But you found an amazing person. We really encourage you to do reference checks, and we really encourage you to do police checks. Follow up on those things that they have told you that they have got. If they got a job with a corporate organization, they would be asked to prove their driver's license, to prove their passport, to prove the qualifications that they say that they have. What often happens is that we connect human to human. We've invited them into our home and we've invited them in for a cup of tea, and we haven't specifically asked the questions. So I really do encourage you to complete a reference check, to ask someone about them, to do those police checks. And the joy of being you is that you're welcome to adjust that to whatever's going to suit you, whatever's going to make you feel comfortable. Many of the IF hosts can run police checks for you. Failing that, we can run police checks for you. Even if we haven't helped you recruit, you're still really welcome to ask us to do that. Because while we've met them human to human and we have great faith and we've met them and they seem lovely, particularly if they're going to work with young kids, it's really valuable to check that stuff out. So, as I said before, you can pay whatever rate that you want to pay. So there's a huge established thing within the disability sector about pay equity, which is many years ago, the government decided that support workers were systemically discriminated against because of being such a female-dominated workforce. So the government set, as part of a huge process, set some pay rates that were going to be in place for support workers to ensure that, to try and balance out that gender discrimination. What unfortunately happened was that legislation expired, and we've been in limbo for the last 2-3 years since then, trying to resolve what happens now. So pay equity is still currently set at anywhere from 22.25 to 28.25, I think it is, except that 22.25 is now below minimum wage. So what it means is that there's a minimum that you can pay people based on their qualifications. So if someone has a degree in certain topics, or a certificate, like an NZQA certificate, particularly in disability related fields or healthcare related fields, then you have to pay them at least whatever that corresponding pay equity rate is. And your IF host will be able to explain that stuff to you and help you find out whether or not that qualification meets a certain standard. But now that the pay equity rates are so close to minimum wage, as I said, it's about you working out what their job is and you paying for what their job is. So not every job is a disability. They're all disability related jobs, but they're not all disability related jobs. The primary purpose of them is not always disability. So what we want to make sure is that if this is a soccer coach role, call it a soccer coach role, but pay for it as a soccer coach role. If this is a housekeeper role, then call it a housekeeper role and pay for it as a housekeeper role. There is no need to look at it through a disability lens unless the person you are trying to hire is going to look at it through a disability lens. So we don't frequently use, as I said, support worker and caregiver and things like that in our job terminology, because most of the people who come to us looking for staff, they're looking for someone for young people for respite in the weekends or after school. And most of the time they're either looking for peers or they're looking for university students, or they're looking for retirees. But what it means is that we're not looking for people who identify as disability support workers. We are looking for people who identify as, that sounds like some kids I would love to get to know, or that sounds like a hobby that I could help them. They could come and join my Dungeons and Dragons group and we could go and do the thing at Armageddon. Whatever that person's passion is, we would spend a long time looking for someone who loved bikes and wanted to go bike riding for 6 hours every Saturday. Because it sounds like hell to me, but there are people who that is their dream job. Really going to go pay me to go bike ride with some, enthusiastic young kid. Absolutely. So it's just about finding the balance and what's going to work. So now we get to those tricky HR questions. And as I said, Sarah and I are not HR professionals. But what often happens is people get to this point and they go, oh, this is all too hard. I'm not going to do it. So you need to think about what the best way to set up your employment is. So lots of people, some people outsource to an agency, they pay a higher fee, and they don't have to employ anybody. They don't have to do reference checks. They don't have to do anything. And lots of those agencies will take nominations from you. So if you've found an amazing person, lots of them will hire that person on your behalf, but you still pay that premium rate. Some people pay contractors. So if you're a contractor, you send an invoice instead of a timesheet, and you are responsible for your own tax. Pros and cons. It puts a lot of people off. It particularly puts a lot of young people off because they don't know how to do their own tax, and that sounds scary. So it's just thinking that through of what's going to be the safest, or whether that's going to be worth it for you. It means that they are not obligated to you. They can walk away at any point, but it also means you can walk away at any point. And all of the costs are bundled up into today. So then you hire an employee, and in that you've got this debate of, do you hire a permanent person a casual person or a fixed term person. And the reality is you have to do what the job genuinely is. If this is genuinely every Friday from 4 till 8, then it is a permanent part-time role. If it's a casual role, it means there's a bit more variability. If sometimes it happens and sometimes it doesn't, and sometimes the hours move and there isn't a promise. And again, in that instance, both parties can walk away at either time. So it's got some risk to you that you find a great person and then they leave. And then there's also these fixed term roles, which is if there's a reason that this role won't go on forever, perhaps you want them till the end of the school year, or perhaps you need more help during wintertime or whatever your circumstances is, then that's the other option. All of the IF hosts provide different support around staffing. So some of them send you to New Zealand business website and say, here is a employment agreement builder, make one. I send a lot of people to the LifeWise website. LifeWise are one of the smaller IF hosts who are only based in Auckland. But they have all of their templates on their website. So if you look up LifeWise Individualized Funding, you'll find an employment agreement and all of the tax forms and all of the things that you need in one handy and publicly available place, whether or not you are their an IF customer with them. So there's all sorts of ways to do it, and your IF host will give you some advice, but they all give different advice. And in the end, like me, all those people who are giving you advice are not HR professionals. So you have to trust your judgment, and you have to seek professional advice if you think you're getting into something sticky, because in the disability space, that's not our area of expertise. They often have advice to give, and they've seen a lot of people do this. But yeah, it's different. So if you've heard all of that and you're like, wow, that sounds way too hard, then this is a thing that we do for people. So in our situation, people come to us, they tell us what they need from a staff member. We write up the job ad. We make a plan of where to look for those people. And then we do the running around to find people and screen anyone who applies. And we come back to you and say, hey, we've chatted on the phone to Stephanie for 10, 15 minutes. She was lovely. She meets all your criteria. Do you want to give her a call? And at that point, we step away. If you like Stephanie and you hire Stephanie, that's your business. We are just doing introductions. And we charge a fee for that, and that fee can be paid for out of your individualized funding. So if you did listen to all of my spiel and go, no, don't want to do any of that, then you can talk to Sarah or I about that one. But if not, then we're hoping that we've given you some tools to be able to do this in a way that's going to work. So the biggest thing, and I think I come back to it at the end of all of these conversations, is you need to know what you're trying to achieve. Is that you only get good staff when staff know why they're coming to work. You only get good staff when they feel like they're making an impact and they feel like they are supported and they are being helpful. So you need to make sure that you are supporting them and telling them that they are being helpful. So that's being clear about what the role is, not selling them on some make-believe story that's not going to be the job. It doesn't mean you've got to lead with all of the hard parts, but making sure that you don't fail to mention some of those hard parts before they get too invested. And then it's about providing some support and some training so that they actually aren't chucked in the deep end. And because what we know is that finding people is hard, when you find someone, we want them to stay. And so lots of that is just giving them a call every once in a while and asking them how it's going, is there anything they need from you, what you could do to be more supportive, that kind of thing can be really helpful. So there endeth the talking from me, sorry. And we will move into a space where we can have a more open conversation with everybody. So thank you all for listening.